in the past, we didn't have a problem generating enough care team members to volunteer. And it was somewhat more challenging. We received the volunteers we needed for 9/11, but it took a while longer. Part of that was because, and I think in large part, a lot of the families of the volunteers were like, you're not going. We're under attack, and you're not going to get on a plane and fly to these cities that were impacted by the 9/11 terrorist events and go volunteer. And yet we did get enough people. And on 9/11, on September 11th, 2001, American did deploy 4 flights out that afternoon. We sent one to Boston, one to New York, one to Los Angeles, and one to Washington, D.C. The board point of each of the flights, the accident point, if you will, which was Washington, D.C., which was the board point, New York City, of course, for the towers, and then Los Angeles, where the 2 American Airlines flights were headed. But how we worked with families then was very different, because most come to the Family Assistance Center, right, for information and briefings we talked about earlier. This time, they couldn't get to the Family Assistance Center because there was no air traffic. So unless you lived in those cities or you could drive to those cities, most of our work was done telephonically this time. And one, that provided an added layer of security, because everybody on board the plane initially was considered suspect, crew members and everyone, by the FBI, until everybody was cleared, sans the terrorists, of course, that were on board, as to who we could talk to and who we couldn't, whether it was American Airlines or United Airlines that was responding. But those were things we'd never planned on. I mean, nobody had in their plans, I think, planes being used as weapons of mass destruction, and then ultimately how we would respond to that. So we were all learning on the fly that particular event.
Such a complicated situation when we have the law enforcement and the city officials and the airline officials, and you have and so many different emotions. Very difficult situation.
It was very, very challenging. And then with that said, and the emotions were so strong, family members in this particular event knew what happened. They saw it on TV. Unlike an accident where you don't know what happened and what caused it. So, we had more shock that we were dealing with and some anger, but more shock and numbness in 9/11 versus maybe anger and anxiety issues that we may have seen in other accidents. 9/11 also had something out that was different compared to the other events, and that was after we got home, the outpouring of gifts to those on board the plane was amazing. Both American and United were getting inundated with calls asking for the passenger list and crew list, because people wanted to donate things to their families. And of course, for privacy reasons, we couldn't do that. So we said, we'll send everything to us and we'll disperse it. There were checks for money or letters for money, and then we'd send the letter to the family, and the family could decide to reach out to the organization. Memory boxes, cards from school kids, flags done, and U.S. flags and nice flag boxes that were made, quilts, food gifts, all sorts of things. And the families were very appreciative of those things, but it also became somewhat overwhelming. And of course, as an airline, we weren't logistically prepared for all those things. So we had to manage that process, and we did, but we didn't know. And so now we look at that for future